Hey, St. John, welcome to the Post-Sermon Podcast. I am Deaconess Dehlia, and with me today, I have two guests. I have Pastor Adam.
Hey, Deaconess.
And I have Kris Camealy.
Hey, Deaconess.
And the three of us, we are together for a special kind of podcast. We are doing a Lenten study, if you will, virtual book group. I know the two of you guys, you did the same thing last Lent over Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen.
Yep.
And we ordered a bunch of Spirituality of the Cross books. That's what we're going to be talking about. It's by Jean Edward Veith.
And they're purple books, so they'll go well with Lent.
Purple books. There are 100 copies, and they'll be out very soon before Lent. And we're going to go have an episode per chapter, right? And talk about it, discuss it. And you guys can listen to this podcast and read this book simultaneously. And that's the plan.
Yeah, this is a book. I think you've done this for one of your
Yes.
studies one time.
Yes.
And I've used this from time to time with various folks, kind of on like 101 like catechism classes or for other occasions. But this is one I would love to get into the hands of the congregation. And this seemed to be a way to get it out in a mass sort of way.
I also had to read this book in college, too, in one of my theology classes. So it's a really good book on just Lutheranism, Lutheran spirituality. So it'll be fun for us to talk about it. Okay, so this first episode is an introduction. So Pastor Adam, do you want to give us a reading summary of the intro?
Yeah, I would encourage you all to also check out Veith's preface just to get some of the reason why he wrote. This is the third edition of the book, but just for the introduction itself, Veith recognizes that there is a universal sense of transcendence among all human beings, that there is a sort of spirituality that we're all naturally pursuing. And how do we reconcile being spiritual creatures, but also the living in the mundane world and amongst matter? And Veith, as he kind of finds his way into Christianity, and especially Lutheran Christianity, he is going to contend that Christianity is the only framework that is big enough to embrace the mystical and the physical world. Christianity is ultimately going to be about God in the flesh, our God on the cross and Jesus Christ. And this spirituality in Christianity, it is experienced, interestingly, in the local congregation. Now, which church? This is one of the things that Veith is going to do, is now you're inside Christianity, how many versions of Christianity there are, denominations and teachings. And so he's going to come at it from a Lutheran angle. And one of the interesting things that he brings up is the word evangelical. He calls Lutherans the original evangelicals. And we'll get into that word, I guess, at some point in the podcast. But what we mean here is we Lutherans emphasize the gospel to such an extent that it is central to every facet of doctrine, practice, that no matter when we talk about the faith, you better not be too far from Jesus. And that's kind of what it means to be evangelical in the sense that Veith is using it. And so he's going to make this point that Lutherans were in a way, the first evangelicals and explore the spirituality found within Lutheranism.
So let's define some terms first. You brought up evangelical. So how would we define evangelical?
Well, I think maybe what comes to mind when you hear the word evangelical?
Tension, honestly. That word's been, it's been volleyed around a lot in our culture in the last handful of years. And so when I hear that word, I just think of like all the tension around what does it mean and how different people interpret it differently. So it might be helpful to start with Veith's. Like, I feel like his definition was like one I actually hadn't read before. To hear it spelled out that way, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's confusing when I hear people call themselves evangelicals, because I know they're talking about some branch of Protestantism. I can't even say that word.
Protestantism?
Protestantism. Too early in the morning, sorry. But some kind of Protestant people, and I don't really know what they mean by that, because I think maybe everyone has their own definition. So I agree with you. I think Veith gives us some concise words.
When I hear evangelical, I often just think general American Christianity.
Yeah.
And this is a word that is not unique to America. It came from Europe, came from the continent. And yet that's what I think of, where I think of like polling, voting blocks, the evangelical vote in elections, and what does that even mean? And so when it comes up, like in our services, like it'll get mentioned in the baptism liturgy, the small catechism is taught in the evangelical Lutheran church or at a confirmation. And I do wonder what people think when they hear evangelical, because it's, as you said, Kris, this has all sorts of other meanings glommed onto it now.
We also know like the word evangelism as well. So I think we kind of know that those words might be related.
I think in some people's definition of it, they are maybe almost like not the same thing, but they're very close. Like they think of, evangelizing. And so they might put the word evangelical around what they believe, but they're talking about evangelism. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah. So how Veith defines it, he brings up how it's derived from the Greek word for gospel, which simply means good news. And so that's why he'll say we can call ourselves the first evangelicals, because that good news of the gospel is our teaching. It predominates our theology.
Yeah, and this is why, I forget where it is in the book, but he makes a comment, you might go over to Germany and find an old Lutheran church, and it'll say in German, you can make out the German enough of, evangelisch or whatever the word is, but it looks like evangelical. We weren't originally called Lutherans. We were just the evangelical church, the good news church, just the rediscovering the gospel sort of church. And that's what we mean by the word. And I do wonder, and this would be kind of interesting to think about us in this podcast or the congregation listening in, what vocab words are worth like reclaiming, and what vocab words in our theology have sort of been just so lost or so distorted, is it even worth kind of bringing back? And this is one of those words I wonder about, because I do hear Lutherans or other Lutheran pastors speak about evangelicalism or evangelical Christianity, and they speak of it as a non-Lutheran thing. And here's Veith saying, no, this is a word worth reclaiming. And so it's neat to come across this from time to time.
Another word that I think might be worth us just defining and talk about, like what Veith says, is the word spirituality. I mean, so the title of this book, Spirituality of the Cross, just like evangelical, I think we all have different definitions of what we think like being spiritual is, and spirituality in general. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that word? What that means? Maybe before reading and after.
I think that's another word that like almost, I don't want to say it has no meaning, but it has so many meanings that it almost has no meaning. Because when someone says it, you can't say that word and then not define it for someone as to what you mean by it, because I feel like it's a word that probably means something different to just about every person that uses it. So it feels like a word that, I just think you can't use it without defining it.
I know I personally, I just don't use it a whole lot, because maybe for that reason, like the whole phrase, like I'm spiritual but not religious, I think it's brought up a lot in our society. And so there's almost this disconnection between being religious and being spiritual, which I don't think, and like Veith says, that's not how it should be. But I don't know. At least that's one of my concerns when that word is brought up.
Yeah, and I appreciate what Veith does with the word. He reminds us that we are body and soul. And so inherently, as creatures, we are tied to the earth. We're tied to matter. We're tied to the mundane. And by nature of our soul and how God has created us, we are also connected to the larger world of divinity. And spirituality, I think how Veith is using it is saying it's this both, that true spirituality is rooted in the physical world, and it's also rooted in the realities of the divine. And to be a truly spiritual person is not to run away from the material, nor is it just to be so caught up in the material and to forget the reality of God's transcendence. And so I appreciate him attempting to reclaim the word, but yeah, I do wonder how lost this word is. But I think it's a helpful word, at least in Veith's approach to the book, that spirituality is, I think, a more acceptable word than I'm a religious person. And so this might be a way for him to sort of open up the door to conversation of what is true spirituality in our relation to God and the world.
I think it might be worth defining Lutheran as well. So he is talking about Christianity as a whole and gives that example of C.S. Lewis, like going, Pastor, do you want to talk about that example?
Yeah, what was it? It was early in the introduction,
Like
the house.
The
right?
house, yeah.
And was it Lewis has this image of you enter the house and you don't just stay in like the little opening hallway. Yeah. There's different rooms, and Christianity has these different rooms, these different traditions,
Kind of all in the same house, right?
Right.
So all, if you will, in the Jesus Christ, that's the foundation, but the rooms all have like their different traditions and beliefs, right?
Yeah,
Beliefs differ.
kind of expressions of Christianity, and Lutheran is one of those. And what I appreciate about Lewis's analogy, and he's Anglican, is a recognition of our brothers and sisters across the church. And, the church is much bigger than just a specific denomination. And yet, Veith is writing from the perspective of being a Lutheran and coming into Lutheranism and what stood out to him and how this framework is, I don't know, satisfactory to him. Is that maybe okay to say? And
because he was not Lutheran, right?
I'm trying to remember. It was kind of
grew up,
bounced around a little bit.
And I think kind of struggled with both the transcendence of God, but then also like you had mentioned, the mundane realities and that like our physical bodies as well, and trying to, I guess, understand who God is, and really found meaning in the Lutheran theology. That's at least what I got from it.
Yeah, I don't think he ever specifically said what church he came out of before he came into the Lutheran church. Did he name a specific? I felt like it was just kind of, I've been everywhere.
Bounced around.
Yeah, I think it's in the preface. This is kind of a general mainline, maybe more liberal theologically background. But this is also, at least for me, one of those words that's very loaded. Oh, you found it?
Sorry, yeah. It says, I grew up in mainline liberal Protestantism.
We know which word you're not going to define for us.
And then flirted with all kinds of spiritualities in college, felt the allure of Catholicism, and became broadly evangelical. And then he stumbled upon Lutheranism.
Right. And then on top of it, I think Lutheran's another vocab word that is maligned and misused. And even how it was originally thrown out, it was meant to be a pejorative and to make fun of the followers of Luther. And Luther did not like his followers being called Lutherans. He just wanted Christian, or, evangelicals might have been a better word. But it's a word that has stuck over time. I don't know. Any reaction to the use of the word Lutheran?
I just thought it was interesting when I was reading that he mentioned that Luther didn't he didn't want it to be called that. And I'm like, and here we are calling it that. Like, why when he but like, kind of created this, I don't know if maybe this isn't the right way of putting it, but like, this is a denomination that follows in his teaching and his leading. And he said he didn't want it to be called that. And then we're like, well, that's what we're going to call it anyway.
Yeah. Or I was just listening to some commentary the other day. You'll see in his writings from time to time of like, just burn everything I wrote, except for like the Small Catechism and the Bondage of the Will. But please don't hold. And we just have volumes of his work that's just been preserved. And he's in this awkward place of, it's not supposed to be about me. It's supposed to be about Jesus. And yet the name has endured, right, in the title of it.
I was just going to say, during the Reformation, he was trying so hard to just get back to like the church and Christianity and to, like orthodoxy, right? And so he was not trying to branch off and like have his own denomination. That's never what he wanted.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think Lutheran, it kind of sounds more like that instead of getting back to, and I can see why Veith likes that word, getting back to being an evangelical, right? Like, I don't know. So in a tricky spot, but that's kind of where we are with the word. And even in Lutheranism, it's tough because there's other branches of like being Lutheran can mean something different depending on what denomination of Lutheran you are.
Right. And so there's sort of a two-sided way I use the word Lutheran. One is it should be a synonym to the word Christian, because it should just be in concert and in sync with the teachings of Christ. And if it's not, we got to throw out whatever is not in sync with Christ. And so whenever we use Lutheran, we should intend it to mean a synonym with Christian. And going back to Lewis's analogy, the house has many rooms of the Christian church, and we got to recognize that there are different streams of teaching and tradition, and they all exist. And so how do you distinguish between them? And so you do need vocab words. You do need to put people in boxes and in rooms, which of course makes people cranky. And so Veith is going to be writing from a Lutheran perspective. And I think that's one of the themes of slowing down with this podcast and going through this study, is kind of reflecting, is the teaching here in sync with what Christ has handed down? Because it should be always head back to the cross and our Savior, Jesus, not our Savior, Luther. So I thought maybe to ask you all might be kind of fun, because Veith is reflecting on his journey into Christianity, especially within Lutheran Christianity. How did you all come into Lutheranism? And I can start off.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah. I don't remember because I was 2. My mom was in the Roman Catholic Church, and so I was baptized in Rome. Well, not the city, but...
Oh, I was like, for real?
That'd be sweet. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. What a story.
Yeah, with ancient font. Yeah. And when I was 2, my mom started attending a Lutheran church and went through the new member classes there. And so that's all I know. And that's kind of my connection to it.
Well, I'll go next. I came to it through marriage. I probably have a background not too dissimilar to Veith's. I've been in all kinds of different churches. I was originally baptized in the Catholic Church, and we left the Catholic Church as a family when I was 14, and then became Anglican, Episcopalian, then Anglican, because our church broke off. It's a whole journey. So I could do a whole separate podcast on just my journey through the churches. But when I met my husband, Kurt, he was in the Lutheran Church, and I don't know, somehow we just stayed there. We tried other churches when we first got married, and we just ended up, I feel like it didn't, I don't know, I hate to say it wasn't intentional, because maybe there was some intention behind it, but I think both of us like liturgy, and so we were trying to find a place that we could agree on that maintained the liturgical practices that we were both comfortable with, and so it just kind of happened to be the Lutheran Church.
So did Kurt grow up Lutheran?
Yes, he was born and raised in that tradition from the get-go, and he was in the ELCA growing up, but yeah, so that's where we are now. And we've been here for almost 20 years.
So my story is, so when I was born, my parents had fallen away from the church. My mom was in the Lutheran Church for a little bit, and my dad grew up in the Catholic Church. Then they got married, and they had me, and they were looking for a preschool. And there was a Lutheran church pretty close by that had a really good preschool, so they enrolled me, and they became really interested just in the church and joined the new members classes, and then decided to join. And so I got baptized there when I was 5. And so what I remember growing up has been being Lutheran, but I guess technically it wasn't till preschool. Great. So are there any quotes that you guys like from the introduction?
Yeah, I'll go. I like his quote on page 23 where he says, "Those who see spirituality in terms of subjective gratification having nothing to do with objective truth lay themselves open to every kind of superstition and exploitation, to every flying saucer, cult, and expensive New Age seminar. The fact is, there can be no spirituality without theology, no religious experience apart from religious belief." I just appreciated that reminder that spirituality has, like, even people who say, like, if somebody says they're spiritual, like, there's a theology that they're linking to that, whether it's Christian theology or some other kind of theology. They are connected. You can't have one without the other. And so I think, going back to our defining the word spirituality or struggling to define the word spirituality, this is that reminder that, like, it is linked to a theology and it doesn't exist apart from that.
Yeah, and I think this, sometimes how we speak about how the world is, or we're in a quote unquote post-Christian America, or sometimes how we speak about it seems like that there will be no more religion or spirituality. And Veith is reminding us that we cannot undo the created spirituality of our being. And so we are going to have that sort of resonance and search for, what was that? There's no theology, right? There can be no spirituality without theology, no religious experience apart from religious belief. And so these things will be recast and rebranded, but we are always spiritual beings, and we have our religious systems too.
Yeah. What about you? What was your quote?
How about, I like on 25, or sorry, bottom of 24. Rather, spirituality has to do precisely with the content, what fills abstract theology, mundane institutions, the physical realm, and the everyday life of the Christian with their real substance. I think one of the temptations with the word spirituality is to run away from the physical, and Veith is going to keep it very grounded in matter and the world and our bodies and so on. This is why, as a Christian, we don't just have our relationship with God, we are part of the local congregation. It's just inevitably, it's a part of the deal. It's part of how God has set it up. This also reminds me a little bit of Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. One of the early temptations that Screwtape tells Wormwood to do to his patient, to his human being, of when he's in church, make him notice the awkwardness of church. The guy's squeaky boots and the person who can't sing and the body odor and like, this is really it. This is really the church where God dwells, and kind of make us doubt it. And our emphasis as Christians is, yes, God, this is what God does. He comes to us in the material, in the present world. He is among us here and ties us together as this local body. So I love that use of spirituality, is it's not soul talk. Spirituality is soul body talk, I guess.
Yeah, and I like what you said. I think my quote kind of goes along with that. This is from the top of 18. He was talking about like mysticism and speculation and moralism first, about paths of trying to find God. But then he goes on to say, what I needed was a spiritual framework big enough to embrace the whole range of human existence, a realistic spirituality. I needed a spirituality that is not a negation of the physical world or ordinary life, but one that transfigures them. I love that so much, just encompassing both the spiritual, immaterial, the transcendence of God, and then what we experience here on earth in our bodies, going through the everyday and just seeing God is in all of that. And I mean, that's just what I love about our faith and being a Christian, is nothing's left out. It's all like God's just in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, I like that. One that transfigures him. I like that phrase.
So something else really cool about Spirituality of the Cross is Veith, after each chapter, I guess it's at the end of the book, right?
Yeah, it's at the very end in his appendices. Okay. He has a whole list of resources.
Yeah, recommended reading that if you found like maybe one chapter really interesting and wanted to do a deep dive into it, there's reading suggestions that he has. So Pastor, were there any recommended reading from this intro that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, well, I'm just flipping through it again, the books I grabbed. I don't see them in here. However, the recommended reading is great, and I'll highlight some of them in the back, and he has some nice descriptors. But I think with the ideas of this introduction, I have two books. One is co-authored with Veith and another pastor named Trevor Sutton, called Authentic Christianity, How Lutheran Theology Speaks to a Postmodern World. Deaconess, you did this in your book study.
I did.
Yeah, and how was that?
It was really good. I love it. Very similar to this, but maybe just a little bit more info too.
Yeah, and I think especially with the themes of the introduction, and this is the third edition of the book, Veith has grown this book over the editions, and some of this language in Authentic Christianity has found its way in there. So if you want to go more in depth in some of these topics we brought up today, that's probably a good next path. And then maybe just the whole Lutheran discussion and the loadedness of the word. I'll also bring up a book here by Trevor Sutton, just aptly titled Being Lutheran. I did this in my book study, and really nice because it's not about Luther, but about, these emphases we have of God comes to us, and it's focusing on the local congregation and the means of grace and so on. But really nice reads. authentic Christianity and being Lutheran.
Okay, very good. Well, that is our introduction episode. So hope you guys enjoy Spirituality of the Cross, and look forward to maybe just any discussions that you have like after church about the book. I know the three of us would love to talk to members about it.
Yeah, and so this is going to release each week, whenever this episode comes out, each week after, and the idea is up until Palm Sunday. That'll be our final episode that comes out. Dealing with the book.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have. Thanks for listening, you guys. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.